And thanks to everyone for being here. This is exciting to see all of our great partners in the room. On behalf of the City of Santa Fe, I just want to start off by expressing my appreciation for all the work that all of you do. Thank you. I'm going to start with some introductions. Today, with me today is Roberta Katanak, who has worked with me at the city for many years. And I think most of you are familiar with Roberta. She's going to handle part of the presentation. Also with me today is Toniette. Toniette is also one of my rock stars and has been through this rodeo a few times and is also familiar to all of you as our main reporting person. The person who is not with us today is Cody Minnick because he is enjoying time with his 2-week-old baby. But he will be back when we get underway in the later part of this fiscal year and all next year. He'll be back, but he's busy doing much more important work right now, probably changing diapers. Okay, we have one more person joining. And just one more time, if you haven't, please type your name and your organization and the best way to contact you into the chat. All right, so without further ado, I am going to get started. I will share my screen. And if you don't mind muting while we are going through the presentation, that would be great, just to make sure we don't have any side noise. All right, so let's get started. So if you are not here for the training presentation for Community Development Block Grant and Affordable Housing Trust Funds, you are welcome to drop off, but hopefully all of you are. We do this meeting every year, and it's lots and lots of information. We will have pauses for questions. We will also, if we can't answer the question today, because sometimes they get pretty technical, we will make a note of the question. We will answer it after we've researched the answer, and then we will post everything on our website so that everyone has access to the same information. So good morning. Here's what we're going to cover today. It's a lot of stuff. We're going to tag team a little bit so you don't get super bored with my voice, Tony and Roberta and I. And some of this stuff we won't spend a huge amount of time on. So I think all of you know the Office of Affordable Housing. There are 5 of us. We also have another new face who's not here today, Florence Frank. She is a housing policy fellow who's with the city for 2 years on a paid fellowship through the Bloomberg Foundation, which is kind of exciting. Our main job in this community is to provide this funding to all of you. These are called requests for applications because that works a little bit better than trying to determine what services the community needs and sort of dictating what the scope of work is. Rather, we like to turn it around and say, here's the broad eligibility criteria for this funding. Now, those of you who are doing the work in the community, you tell us where the need is, you tell us what you see, you tell us what your capacity is, and what kind of housing programming services you can provide and want to provide and are well situated to provide. So I kind of like it this way because I feel like we're sort of crowdsourcing solutions, which is more effective, in my humble opinion, than the government deciding how to do the work. There's a whole lot of administrative work that comes along with these funds, particularly the CDBG funds. So we spend a lot of our time paying attention to HUD and following their rules. I think many of you know what that feels like. The Santa Fe Homes Program is our local inclusionary zoning requirement. So all new development has to provide a percentage of affordably priced units. That's probably the next part of the Office of Affordable Housing that we spend the most time on. We do provide members of the community referral to many of your programs, many of your organizations. We don't provide direct services to anybody, which is a disappointment when somebody finds us and then we can't truly help them, but we do our best. But at any point in time, I'll just put this out there. If any of your organizations have started a new program or have started responding to a new issue in an innovative way, please let us know so that we can connect anyone who comes to us first with you and your organizations. And then we do policy development. We work with our elected officials for legislation, and we participate in the city's effort to outreach to the community as much as we can. And there we have several roles. Roberta, who is going to cover contracting and invoicing. She's our contract administrator, so she handles that piece. Tonyette, as I mentioned, is our reporting guru, so she helps with all of the paperwork around collecting the quarterly reports, entering the data into the HUD system, tracking all of our accomplishments through various spreadsheets. Tony is amazing with spreadsheets. And then she's just also there for general assistance. Cody, who's not here, he would normally be doing this training, and he is our project manager for all of our housing funds. So whenever there's a question about maybe sort of stepping out of the box a little bit to do something that's not clear, specified in your scope of work, Cody's going to be your first stop. Or if there's a question about the eligibility of uses of funds, you're going to go right to Cody. I'm the director for the Office of Affordable Housing, so on my best day, I'm holding all of this together. On my worst day, I'm buried in meetings and emails and can't get any work done, but I think we all know that feeling. And then Florence Frank, who I mentioned, is our housing policy advisor. All right, so I'm just going to start off with a topic that is really, really important on the federal level, but it's also important locally, and this is conflict of interest. And the way the city defines this and the way the feds define it is that you have to be aware that this applies to all of your organization's employees, agents, consultants, officers of your board, any elected appointed officials of your organization who are connected to any functions or responsibilities related to your funded activities, or who participate in decision-making processes. So if the expenditure of funds that are coming from the city result in inside information, a financial interest or benefit to any of those people or someone who they have immediate business or family ties, or any other group that any of your employees or board members are participate as an officer or director, and that includes charitable organizations. If there's any benefit or interest, financial interest, it's financial interest or benefit that's gained, that is considered a conflict of interest. So the first thing you do is you call us up and say, hey, we want to contract with this company because they're giving us the best price, but their board member is also the uncle of our board, whatever. I mean, it's a small town, so we do run into this, and we also are conscious of wanting to take advantage of those relationships to the extent that they don't result in a conflict of interest. So call us up first, and then if it's a really big question, we can research it. Tony, your hand is up.
Yes, ma'am. It looks like, thank you, Johanna, for the notice. Somebody may be in the waiting room.
I just admitted them. Thank you for letting me know. All right. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Roberta to talk about contracting with the city. You're on mute, Roberta, and I'm going to go ahead and fill in all the bullets for you.
Okay.
Oops. Oh, went too far. There we go.
Okay. So with the contracting with the city, so once the funding amount has been approved, recommended by CDC, we'll get a draft of the scope of work and the amount that is approved. What we do need in your applications is to have the CRS number and the business licenses. And then of course who the contact person is really helpful, so that if I need to reach out to anyone, that's helpful. If you are approved for a contract, you do have to be registered as a vendor in our new Munis system. And right there is the link that you need to go into. We cannot move forward until you have been registered. So make sure that once you know that you have been approved, go in and register immediately, so that and then once you've done that, you can shoot me an email and let me know that you've been registered, so that I can move forward with the application. That will delay a lot of the process if you're not registered. So and just keep in mind, like, if addresses change, the way you want to get paid, if it's through ACH, or if you want to check, all of that you have to do. We can't do that anymore. So you can't pick up the phone and say, hey, can you start sending us checks now? We can't do that. You have to do all of that in this link. So that would be the responsibility of each of you if you're approved. We do require evidence of insurance. So we need to have, you need to have general liability, professional liability, and workers' comp. Those three things always have to be included. So when you submit your application, make sure you include the proof of insurance. And it should also include, as an additional insured, the city of Santa Fe. So those four things, remember when you're submitting your insurance or your application, that you do have full coverage insurance. And keep track of when, because I know the insurances all expire at different times. So make sure you keep it on your calendar we do need a renewal. So say your insurance expires for general liability on May 30th. We need to have an updated certificate of insurance before it expires. We technically should not be paying out any invoices if we don't have insurance in place. So I try and keep a calendar with all of, like, when they're about to expire, but that's something that you really need to keep track of as well. Contract is approved by Quality of Life Committee. And so, yeah, it goes through the different committees, the Quality of Life and the Finance Committee, and then the City Council. Depending on the amount of the contract, it'll go through those three committees. And so it is a long process. So we have to make sure we get everything in on time, and because we have to meet deadlines in order to get it before the new fiscal year. And then once the executed contracts are in place, I will request a PO. And then once I have the executed PO and the executed contract, I will send you a copy. And once you get those from me, then that's your notice to go ahead and start spending the money. So I'm also going to cover with the financial systems. We do require that there's an audit done each year. And I think this is more so for like at monitoring, we'll ask for the audit. And let's see. So you do have to have your audit done each year. And let's see, must have organizational financial policies. So you do have to also provide your financial policies, the organizational charts, and show your fiscal internal control. And most of these are going to be through well, you're going to have them in your application so that we see that you have them. But we're also going to look for them at the end when we do a monitoring on your contracts. We're gonna need a copy of all of those as well.
And I'm going to jump in really quickly, Roberta. I think a really important point to make on this one is we want to make sure that the person who is approving the expense also isn't the person signing the check to pay the expense, right? Like that's kind of the best summary of internal control. And I know some organizations are really small, but you got to figure out a way to have different people approving those expenditures.
Okay. And then just make sure that your files are complete. So you have to make sure that all of the documentation of any of your expenses are in the file. So we may not require everything, but you do have to have it in the file, because if we ever go out to audit or HUD goes out to audit, it needs to be in there. So that so just always make sure that your files are organized and in place and everything's together. And
I can jump in for this last bullet. I'll talk much more about how to document the leverage sources of funding in your application. But I think what the point I want to make here is you have to track the use of that leverage, just like you would track the use of the actual dollars. So sometimes leverage can include, or match can include, an organizational resource or staff time. We want to know that you're also tracking that as an expenditure, as a contribution into your project, just like you would if they were dollars. All right, so we'll move on to procurement. So if you are applying for a project where you need to hire a consultant or a contractor to perform the work, we want to see in your application that you have at least one cost estimate, just so we kind of are grounded in understanding that this is a realistic expense. But once you move forward with the actual contract for that other entity, we want to know that you have followed, especially this is so important for CDBG funds, you have followed a procurement process that is compliant for CDB. For CDBG funds, it's the 2 CFR 200, all the accounting standards. For local funds, we're not as strict, but we do want to see that you've shopped it around a little bit. So we want the documentation that you have reached out and gotten bids from different providers. Sometimes, depending on the work, there's only one person in town. We're a small town who does it, so we get that, but you have to document that. And I think the rest of this stuff goes without saying, more or less, but we would also, the final bullet, this is a little aspirational, but HUD does track this for CDBG funds, and it feels like the right thing to do anyway, but to the extent possible, contracting with local businesses, minority or women-owned businesses is great. And if you do that, please document, to call it out, like let us know, because we want to be able to report, especially to HUD, that's happening in our community. All right, so Tony's going to talk a little bit about record keeping.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. So when we talk about record keeping, we kind of focus on our administrative records. So that's going to be your personnel files, property managing of your files, general program files. So we'll keep a copy of your application. If it's whatever type of fund agreement we have, we'll keep copies of things like that, program policies and guidelines. Let's see. Okay, I'm sorry, I thought someone had a question. So legal files, articles of the incorporation, bylaws of organization, tax status, board minutes, contracts, leases, and other agreements we're keeping. Those are examples of legal files that we keep in the actual physical file. along with a physical file, we also keep everything in our shared drive online. So that's readily available. Financial records, that was what Alexander described, or maybe it was Berta on the previous slide. So our project case files, that's going to be documentation of all funded activities, individual beneficiaries, property owners, and or those properties, including income verifications and determination of eligibility.
That's really important. That might be the most important thing on this slide. No, it's not, but. Anything else to add, Tony,
I
in
was just
terms of
quickly looking over this.
collecting the data?
So, yeah, and we can talk more, a little bit about it, about our, when we collect those, quarterly reports. But that's also something that we definitely keep, track of, including copies of like the submitted requests for reimbursements that we keep between, each other in all contracts. But it's super important just to remember to keep, an ongoing file of, you know, in chronological order. So in the end, it's going to help you when we're going through that monitoring review. You have your contract, a copy of your contract file and everything, all those attachments that you'll learn that are required. Invoicing, keep copies of those quarter reports. And then maybe you have a certain success story, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But you want to keep pictures or just a synopsis of things that are pertinent to your file, to your contract.
Thanks, Tony. Jessica has a question.
Yes, ma'am. I think you are muted.
Where'd she go? All right, we do have a little moment for questions in a minute, so. And feel free, if you want to make sure your question, you don't forget it in the meantime, feel free to type it into the chat too. All right, Roberta's going to talk a little bit about invoicing.
Okay, so if you are granted a contract with us, you're going to hear from me a lot. You'll probably get tired of me, but just some of the main points is that we do like to see the invoices submitted monthly. And so when you submit for July, the invoice would be due August 15th. So it's the following month, the 15th of the following month is when the invoice is due. And then on your invoice, the way it should look, so you will have a cover invoice page, and it should be on your letterhead, so it shows, you know, who it's coming from, and it should be very clear that that is the invoice. And then you want to reference your PO number, the name of the project, whether it's Affordable Housing Trust Fund, for mortgage reduction or whatever. And then you want to put your name and address of, you know, like whoever you are, the grantee, and then a contact person and phone number, so that if I have to reach out to you for whatever reason, if I need something corrected or whatever, I know who to contact. Make sure that you put the date of what the invoice, what dates the invoice is from. So if it was for Q2 October invoice, then you could put that. Or if you're submitting quarterly, then you can put Q3 January through March. So just be specific as to what dates you're invoicing us for, so that we can keep track of that as well. One thing to keep in mind is you don't ever combine two different quarters. So if you have December through February, you'd have to send two separate invoices. So you'd have to send the one for December, because that's Q2, and then Q3 would be January and February. So make sure that you always separate those. They should never come together as one. because we will reject it and send it back. And then provide a brief narrative. Again, you know, is it CDBG funding, mortgage reduction, or whatever the scope is. The expenses supporting documentation. Make sure that you always include all of the supporting documentation when you submit an invoice. So if you have, sorry, my work phone is ringing. If you have, you're submitting your invoice and it has your cover sheet, you know, all of your information and what the amount that you're invoicing us for. And then you want to also have like a report behind it with more detail, telling us, you know, client 101 paid this much rent, or this is how much rent is due. We're requesting reimbursement for, you know, $200. They paid $500. We're requesting $500. Whatever it is, you know, just keep like a report of every one of the expenses that you're asking for reimbursement from us. And then behind that, you're going to have your supporting documentation. So if you have a rent that was paid, we need to see the statement of the rent, how much it was, and it needs to match what was paid. And behind that, we need to see the show proof that it was paid. And so that would be like a canceled check, or you can send us a copy of the check that you wrote to the landlord. And then we also need to see the either the canceled check that the landlord did deposit it, or we need to see a copy of your bank statement showing that it did clear the account. If you do your bank statement, please black out all of your account numbers. We don't want to see any of that. Because remember, all of this information is public record. So we don't want any of that personal stuff in our records at all. And so, you know, if you, like in any of the supporting documents would be like your payroll, timesheets, if that's what we're paying, depending on what the program is that you got approved for. So just keep in mind, you know, like everything has to match. So like if you have your report and you're charging, you know, 500, 700, 1200, make sure that the supporting documents behind it follow that order. So I don't, you know, don't send us, you know, your report it's all in line this way, and then you have all your supporting documentation is all scrambled, and you know, just so I don't have to be looking through each of the documents to see, oh shoot, this one doesn't, it goes way down here or whatever. Like everything should match when I'm looking through it. And if there's numbers that are off, so say the invoice shows that they paid, you know, $500, but you are asking for $200, explain why. Because I'm looking at these invoices wanting to match what you guys paid, and they're not matching. So then it makes me question, and it delays the process of me submitting for payment. So just put an explanation in there to why they're not, why they don't match or whatever. Because sometimes if it's a rent, maybe the tenant pays some of it, and then they're asking you for help for the rest, and that's okay. We just need to know. And then the whole process for submitting for payment, it does take about 10 days to process the whole thing, but that's not from the date that you submit the invoice to us, because I still have to review it, and then we have to take into consideration, if something's wrong on the invoice or needs to be corrected, you know, we're going to do some back and forth. So that it's not counting that time. So once I have everything the way it's supposed to be and I submit it for approval, it'll take about 10 days from that time. So so just make sure that you know, you allow that, or you know, like how much time it's going to take to get paid. And one other thing that I do want to say is that if you ever have to make corrections to your invoice, when you submit the corrections back to us, you have to submit the entire packet to us. Don't just send me the pages that you corrected, because we can't like piece the packet together. We need a complete packet again. So that one is an important one to me because it gets it's difficult to try and piece them, and then I probably will stick them into the wrong packet or whatever. So I don't want that to happen. So I think that's it. And then if there's any questions, if you ever have any questions on an invoice, please just give me a call.
Thank you, Roberta. And I want to reiterate what Roberta just said. Like, once you get your contract in place and you're a little unsure how to document stuff, Roberta will sit down with you, and she's an amazing trainer. She and Cody can help walk you through it, and that's always better to do sooner than later. But I also wanted to emphasize that what makes it really tough for us is if you're paying multiple expenses with one check. And I know sometimes you have to do that. And when that happens, you need to break out the exact expense that matches what you're invoicing. Because Roberta made that point, got to match it. Because we have no idea of knowing that one check for $500 covered the two expenses at 250 each. I mean, that one we might be able to figure out, but we just never fear. You're never going to over document. Let me just put it that way. Roberta, I'm going to mute you again. All right, moving along. I promise we won't talk too much longer. All right, reporting. I'm going to turn this over, and I want to make a point also that reporting and invoicing are different. Tony's going to talk specifically about reporting here, and Roberta's just been talking about invoicing. Invoicing is to get reimbursed for your expense. Reporting is to tell us how well you did as a result of expending the money.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, so we'll start with that. I mentioned earlier about telling us about your success stories. That's so important because the service, the work that you all are doing, tell us about it. Send us pictures, brag a little bit or a lot about it, and we'll definitely put that in our media coverage. Like our public information office will put it on our Facebook. We want to hear about those successful stories. It's great work, and we definitely want to celebrate in that. So to cover this slide, reporting, you're going to receive from me on a quarterly basis the type of fund that you receive. So it's going to be the CDBG or the trust fund. You'll get a report template from me via email. And those are, again, on a quarterly basis. So quarter one of the fiscal year is going to be July through September, due the following month on the 15th in October. So then that's an example of the quarter one. On those reports, if you could just describe all progress through the quarter, and that should be according to your scope of work. Also include the number of people served by area medium income percentage, and then the type of service that was provided. Also include the amount of assistance, that dollar amount that was used. Like Berta said earlier, in redacting all that information, it is subject to audit review. So don't include any social security numbers or any identifying confidential information. And so like, if you have questions on the reports, I'm always available. Shoot me an email, call me. If I don't answer, I will get back to you that day or as soon as possible. I think that's really all I needed to touch on for reporting. So I will talk a little bit about monitoring. Earlier, Berta was mentioning audit files and the audits that happen. So at the end of the program year, we're going to set up a monitoring visit. Staff will come to your field office, or if that's not possible, Zoom's also an option, but we do prefer to come in person. They're going to look, we'll coordinate all the documents that we'll be requesting. You'll have a chance to gather that information. We ask that you submit it ahead of time. Let's see, there's going to be a self-reporting form that should be filled out and submitted to us. The areas of monitoring are going to include participant eligibility, financial systems, program or project outcomes, proposed program improvements for future funding, and then compliance with federal regs. This is only tied to CDBG. And that includes fair housing policies, lead-based paint, Section 3, and other federal regs. Again, those are more geared towards CDBG fund. So we will send a follow-up letter within 30 days after the visit. And then you have 30 days to respond. In that monitoring, I know Berta was mentioning the audit, and then like you would be responsible for showing us your financial policies, any procedures, and then like your org chart, things related to your fiscal internal controls. And I'm not sure if Alex or Berta wanted to add anything to the monitoring, because normally I'll just like coordinate the scheduling of it, and then I haven't actually been on site to get to witness the wonderful work that you all do. But if Berta or Alex want to jump in and say any specifics that I might have missed.
Thanks, Tony. I think I will definitely also turn it over to Roberta, because she is the one digging through the files. But the self-reporting form is pretty well organized according to what we in turn have to report to HUD and document to HUD. So we will use that self-reporting form as a basis for the site visit. So we'll ask for the documentation, all that backup documentation. That's when we'll look at all of that stuff. So we will look to see that you're following a reasonable income qualification process. We'll look to see that if you're doing rental assistance, that each of your assisted folks has a rental lease in their file, like they're actually following the state law for that. So, you know, don't think that just because you said you did it, we won't verify that you did it. That's kind of the point of the monitoring visit, is just to verify. And we probably don't have time to look at all the files, so we'll randomly select 3 to look at. Roberta, did you have anything else to add? Anything that is helpful for you when you look in those files?
No, I think you guys covered it. I was going to just mention that, you know, we don't pull every single file. We just pull random files, probably 3 or 4 files, and just look through them. So yeah, just make sure that everything is in the file, and preferably like tabbed, so that we know what we're looking
Organized.
at. Yeah. So that's about it.
And if you are using CDBG money, when HUD monitors us, they will pick a couple of programs to do a deep dive on. So they could show up at your office and go through the files themselves. So and we usually don't have a whole lot of time to warn you. So just try to keep your record keeping on track, because it helps rather than scrambling to get it all together. All right, now I'm going to talk about the RFA. It's pretty well laid out in the document itself. What needs to be included. We try to make it very clear. Some of the more detailed, like I'm not sure we're requesting the insurance at the application phase, Roberta, but I've made a note to look that up. I can't really remember. We used to, but we might wait until you actually go under contract to get the insurance documentation, but I have to look that one up. I think the important thing to note here is that we use specific criteria. This just isn't our Community Development Commission like, oh, well, we just think everything that YouthWorks does is great, so we're going to give them money. There is an actual scoring criteria that's used, and it's different for each funding source, and we'll go through that in a little bit. Everything's available on our website. If you have questions, since Cody's out of what was I was gonna say something that out of commission, I guess, for right now. I was gonna make a joke about dirty diapers, but that didn't seem quite appropriate. You can submit any questions to Tony. She will tabulate the questions, the answers, and we'll put them all on the website so that everyone has the same information, access to the same information. By putting your contact info into the chat, that'll make sure that you get notice if any new information is added. Again, same thing. And it's helpful if you send the letter of intent that you're going to apply, just to help us make sure that nobody misses any important information. Next slide, I'm going to go through all the important dates, and then we'll pause for a moment, and then we'll get into some of the technical specifics for each kind of funding. So today's January 5th, 25th, and here we are doing our training. We have to wrap up the amount of time that can be spent submitting questions. So February 13th is the last day to submit questions. This has Cody's email address on it, but please copy Tony, and she's Tios Candelaria Martinez, just to make sure that if he's not there, she can keep track of it. Submittals are due February 16th by email at 5 p.m. There is a 25 meg limit to the size on our email server. So you have to either use a Dropbox if your files are bigger, or send multiple emails, but please be very clear in how you, the subject line. So part 1 of 3, part 2 of that kind of thing. And then here's the other most important date, and all of you who have applied for funds, I'm sure have fond memories. March 4th is the day that applicants are able to present their projects to the Community Development Commission. Remember, the Community Development Commission, for those of you who are new, is a resident-based advisory committee. It's chaired by a city councilor. We have a new chair, brand new chair. Councilor Villarreal was our chair for 8 years. She has retired from the city council, so we're now chaired by Councilor Romero Worth. But I think it's just important to note that everybody else in the committee is a resident of Santa Fe or Santa Fe County. So generally we can, unless we have a ton of applications, we're able to provide 15 minutes for each project. We ask the applicants to create a presentation that takes about 10 to 12 minutes. So we have a few minutes for questions from the committee. The committee will be in person, but we'll have all of you do your presentations by Zoom. It just works a little bit better logistically. And I know Zoom is sort of awkward, but bear with us. It helps us on our end. We determine the schedule, obviously, after we figure out how many applications we have and who's applying, and you'll hear from Tony on that schedule. And it's pretty firm. If you show up late, you're just taking away time from your allowable time. But you will be notified as soon as we've processed the applications, so you can plan for it, because we know it is a command performance, and it's everyone's super busy, so it can be hard to schedule. All right, so I'm gonna pause for questions. I will stop sharing just because it's so hard to see everybody. And if there are any questions based on all of the general info we just provided, the process, what the city requires to get contracts and invoices approved and paid, we can stop right now. And Tony, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, so in the chat, we did have a question from Jessica with the Chainbreaker Collective, and the question was copy of board minutes. I believe she was referring back when we were on the record keeping slide. So legal, when we were talking about the legal files.
Yeah, so we're not going to be reading board minutes, but it's just a general record keeping. Like, we want to know that your organization has enough formality, that your decision-making process is documented and tracked, so that if your board made a decision, like a programmatic decision for how you were using the funds coming from the city, and we're public, so anyone can require our documentation, but we want to know that you guys, and as a subrecipient of HUD, if you go for the CDBG funds, you're responsible for all of the same requirements that we are in terms of documentation. But we just want to know, like, if for some reason we're questioning on how funds were spent. We want to be able to know that you guys can look it up. Like, yeah, the board decided that it would be better to support the people who are trying, you know, whatever, whatever that. And so it's just a record keeping. We're not going to be like sitting there reading through all your board minutes. We just want to know that you guys are tracking your decision making process and you're accountable to your board, because that's the other thing, you know, we want to make sure we don't have kind of a rogue organization that doesn't really have a board or doesn't have a functioning board, that there is a organizational framework there.
Thanks, Alex. And then we had another question from Corina Lopez with Interfaith. And the question is, will there be a section to add success stories or media coverage? It's two-part, or is that something we would add to the report? And this was when we were talking about the reporting slide.
Yeah.
And I believe, in short, just go ahead and shoot us an email about it. Share pictures with us. It's separate from the report. That's not really a requirement. That's just something that we're excited to hear about.
It's not, yeah, it's definitely not a reporting requirement, but it is mentioned in the reporting form. I think we say like, hey, any exciting anything going on? But we do, I think in real time, Tony's right. It's a little more exciting to track it in real time, like when there's an event that happens or so anytime we will take your success stories any time of the day or night. So send them along. We really love hearing about the benefits that are experienced because of these funds. Anything else before I get into the really boring stuff? I know everyone's like, what? That wasn't boring? Oh my God. Any other questions? All right, we're gonna start screen sharing again. And just please, again, feel free to keep track of questions, and we will make sure we don't miss any of them. Okay, so now we are on to CDBG. And if you're applying for affordable housing trust funds, go get a cup of coffee, relax. We'll get there next. But if you're thinking about CDBG, please don't go anywhere. So quickly, CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant Program, is one of the oldest HUD programs. I always get inspired when I think about CDBG. I think it's supported some amazing work all over the country in every kind of community. It's a really amazing program. It is such a pain in the butt to administer. So we try to keep our sights on like how great it is as we slog through all the paperwork. So bear with me because there's a lot of paperwork. And you know, just when you start to feel numb, just think about all the good that this money has done. In Santa Fe, we've had a CDBG funds for over 30 years, I think, but also all over the country. So we are one of 5 entitlement communities in New Mexico. And that means we get the funds directly from HUD. So they don't come through the state, they don't come from an MFA. We get them directly from HUD. And that's both good and bad, but mostly good. So HUD is actually pretty flexible when it comes to how communities prioritize the way they want to spend funds. We do that through several planning documents. Most recently, we did our 5-year consolidated plan. We'll talk a little bit about what those priorities are in a couple slides. But every year we have to do an action plan. So we have to tell HUD how we're going to spend next year's money. And then at the end of the year, we have to do a report, the CAPER report, Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report. Anything but a CAPER. We have to turn that in at the end of the year to talk about how we spend funds. So that's why we get a little antsy towards the end of the year to make sure you get all your reports in. And again, if you receive CDBG funds, you are considered a sub-recipient, which means you are held to the same standard of oversight and regulation as the city is. And that is enforced through your agreement with the city. That's why we do the monitoring. That's why we ask all these annoying questions when we monitor you. Again, I just talked about this. All of this information is available on our website, our planning documents, and our consolidated plan. They're national. So this is like the big high level in order to be eligible for CDBG funds, you have to meet your program or your project has to meet a national objective. Benefit low and moderate income folks. Generally, this is 80% of area median income and below. Aid in the prevention or elimination of slums or blight. We don't do that too often. Meet a need having a particular urgency, referred to as an urgent need. This sounds so generic and like, well, yeah, everything's an urgent need. It's not. It's very, very specific. So we almost 99.9% of the time, we're looking at the low LMI benefit. Yeah, there you go. The total amount of our grant is 600,000-ish per year. 20% of that we use for admin. Sounds crazy, but we need it. Believe you me, we spent a lot of time working on this grant. So it's not a huge amount of money, but we do, again, we try to be inspirational about it and aspirational. Again, admin costs. And here's another sort of piece that gets a little confining is that we do use the funds to pay for public services. Some of your programs have benefited from these funds year over year, but it's capped at 15% of the total grant amount, so that's approximately 90,000. We always get applications in excess of the public services cap, so that's just something to keep in mind as you think about your project. Here's our consolidated plan. Here are our new priority needs and goals as of this past spring. I'm a trained planner, and anyone else who's a planner on this call is going to agree with me, I'm sure, which is this is not how you write planning goals, but this is how HUD likes it. So here you go. And I say that only because the goal is supposed to be like where you're trying to get to, and these goals really are more the steps you would take to get there, but I won't quibble with HUD over this. But you can see these goals really follow the spectrum of housing need, the big buckets. Let's end chronic homelessness. Let's make sure everyone has a stable housing situation. Let's make sure that people can move into home ownership if they want to and that they can maintain it. And then let's look at all of our emergency, that's sort of the kitchen sink category, but really tying housing to the social determinants of health. We've started seeing that in our community. Many programs who never were housing programs realized how important the housing piece was to the success of their clients or participants. So we really want to support that as well. Okay, so eligibility of uses. This is all, I'm not even going to read through this slide because I know everyone can read. But these are pretty, I feel like it's actually pretty flexible in a lot of ways. It's just that the rules that go along with using the funds is what sort of feels onerous, but I think that it's pretty self-explanatory. The only thing I want to point out, construction of new housing units is not allowed generally. There are a few little exceptions, but please don't apply for CDBG funds if you're building new housing. For rehab, great. For infrastructure, great. As long as it's public infrastructure and it's going to benefit low mod people, awesome. I would say over the years, a pretty big chunk of our CDBG funds have gone towards home ownership assistance, home repairs, and helping people buy homes. Okay, so in the RFA, it's all in here. These are the criteria that your project will be scored. We call this weighted criteria. And the reason that it's weighted is that it helps prioritize, because otherwise you can have, if it's just based on raw scores, you could have a project that might score really well in an area that's not quite as important to the city, is not meeting quite as high a priority. So we weight the categories according to the priority. So the funding feasibility is really about, I think I meant to change that language a little bit, but anyway, it's really more about, is there a demonstrated need? Are you meeting a special needs population that there are limited resources to help? Is it compliant with other local laws or other priorities? Are you collaborating with other programs? Like, we're just really trying to get a sense of like, is this like some random crazy project out of left field, or is this something that's really tuned into what the community's needs are? And along with that, you know, is it reasonably, is the amount of funding needed, is that reasonable? We also ask that you sort of think through how you're going to do the work. Most of you have used these funds before. This is probably the easiest part. We just kind of want to know that you're sort of looking at what high performance looks like, how you're going to measure that, how you're going to do it. So that would be the next bullet. And then organizational capacity management, like that's sort of a given. That's kind of part of every single process that this procurement process that the city goes to. You know, we want to know that you're able to handle the funds, that you have the expertise to use the funds efficiently, that your organization, already went through all of the financial record keeping and all of those requirements. Are you financially sound? Can you handle the funding? Do you have any experience with federal awards? You know, that's something we might look at, although that's certainly not a deal breaker. If this is your first time, we're happy to help. We want to support expanding our subrecipients as well. Okay, here's Davis-Bacon. So this is, if you're doing construction, and it's not going to be housing construction, remember, but it might be infrastructure to support housing, affordable housing, or this applies to rehab, anything over $2,000 is subject to Davis-Bacon. We can go through this more in detail, but there is a requirement. The whole purpose of Davis-Bacon is to make sure that federal funds are not being used to support work where the laborers are not getting paid adequately. So, you know, there are good reasons for this law. It does require on-site inspections. It requires submittal of payroll. A lot of contractors who've worked with federal funds before, they know how to do this. This doesn't throw them off, but it is something to think about when you're choosing your contractor. And you have to make sure that the contractor you use is not disbarred from the federal record. So that's where the sam.gov resource comes in. I am not the best expert on this, so we will, if you have a really technical question, we'll have to answer it later after I can research it. So just whatever it is, you know, write it down, keep it in mind, and we'll definitely get you an answer. Fair housing is one of my great loves. I think this is one of the most amazing laws that we have. You know, at its very basic level, it prohibits discrimination in housing related transactions on the basis of a protected class, which is defined as, in the federal law, race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, and disability. The definition of sex has been expanded to include gender, to include sexual harassment, to include sexual orientation. So that's a lot more expansive than it used to be. We do have a local fair housing code that's actually in the process of being slightly amended. And HUD actually has a very robust resource list on its website. So if you have any questions, I encourage you to check it out. Section 3, this is HUD's effort to ensure that low-income folks are also benefiting from the expenditure of funds, either because they own businesses or they are employed by businesses that are paid using these funds. And we can talk more about that later. There is a registry for these kinds of contractors. Our registry in Santa Fe is pretty slim. Build America, Buy America. I'm just gonna say I know almost nothing about this. This is new. It applies to projects over 250,000, so I don't think it's going to apply. Again, like well-intentioned, but goodness, how do you ensure that that happens? Okay, now we're going to talk about environmental reviews. I'm going to turn it back over to Tony because she will walk through some of these details. I just think the big thing to think about with environmental reviews, and it again makes so much sense, right? We don't want to use federal money to either put people in danger because of environmental contamination, or to make sure that the activity that we're funding doesn't result in environmental degradation, but also impact on the folks living nearby. And just one other point, the city is the responsible entity for any use of federal funds in Santa Fe. So if you're using continuum of care funds that aren't coming through the city, you still have to get the city to sign off on your environmental review. Public services have a limited level of review. They're considered exempt, so that's a little bit easier. And then I'll turn it over to Tony to talk about the tiered assessments.
Okay, thank you, Alex. So those tiered assessments are required for public facilities, and then when there's repetitive activity. So like there's down payment on several houses in an area, or home repairs being repetitively done. I'll send out a form, or I'm sorry, we actually require you to submit your request, and we'll talk a little bit, we'll go into details on what's required. We have a checklist for you on the next slide. But before we go on to that, we do have HUD requires a public notice of 15 to 17-day review period for projects that are subject to a site-specific review. And that's prior to the city requesting the release of funds from HUD. I don't know if we mentioned maybe, so these are all required to be done. If you could go back one slide, Alex, I'm sorry. It's okay. I was going to touch on that first bullet. So we just need to do the ERRs prior to the work being performed. And this assesses potential environmental impacts. And we just want to establish that there's no adverse effects on end users.
And actually, the other point to make too is it applies to program income funded activities. So if you're recycling program income and assisting another household with a mortgage assistance, for example, we have to still have to follow the ERR laws.
That's right. So the checklist that I wanted to talk about for mortgage principal reduction and then those home repair projects, they're a little different, but you can always come back to this slide deck or shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to shoot you the checklist. So included in those, as you can see it, we'll ask for things like we'll give you a checklist. That way you can go through it. If you're doing the principal reduction, you want to include your appraisal, the flood certification. Always on both type requests, we're going to ask for income certification. Going back to the principal reduction request, we want you to include the location with the dates of construction. And then on both type of requests, we want you to include a cover form that tells us your requested amount. On those home repair projects, we're going to ask for the same type of checklist. Again, you'll see the income certification there, the lead paint non-disturbance form, the location map, pinpointing, giving us that location of where the project's being done. And then we want you to also submit quotes and include before and after pictures. The important note on this is that you don't want to submit any of your invoices before you actually have the approval on the ERR. Whenever you're submitting for home repair projects, we do have to get clearance from the New Mexico State Preservation Office, and they do typically require about 4-week time span to get their approval done. So really, we can't give you our approval until we hear back from New Mexico SHPO's confirmation. They don't take 4 weeks to turn around, but sometimes they can. So we just kind of have to put that out there. So if you could submit your requests maybe with a minimum of 2 weeks in advance, that's the preference, but you know, the sooner the better, just because now that you know about the turnaround for wait time, you definitely need to just throw that into the mix of your preparing for the approval of your request.
Tony, can I add something, just going back to the invoices? So make sure that when you do submit an invoice, that you include the approval of the ERR with the invoice, so that we know that it was approved before we can pay.
That's a good point. Thank you, Berta. So once upon approval, I will send you an email saying your request has been approved, yada, yada, yada. And then, so that's what Berta's referring to. If you could just, you can include my email to you. And I think that pretty much covers the overview of the reviews. At any point, if you have questions, shoot me an email, call me. I am available.
Thanks, Tony. All right, so briefly, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We are allowed to use local funds to support affordable housing via the New Mexico Affordable Housing Act, which provides an exemption to the anti-donation clause. The MFA provides oversight of these donations, they call them, to ensure compliance with the act. So we have to report every year how we spend funds. Chapter 26-3 in our Santa Fe Code is our Affordable Housing Trust Fund section, if you want to make yourself familiar with it. We require that all of our funded activities, and MFA requires this, meet the objective of our 5-year strategic housing plan, which we're in the process of updating, but the priorities are pretty much the same, which is let's please help everybody and end our affordable housing crisis. And it's also available on our web page. I want to be really clear what's not allowed: administrative expenses, organizational expenses, or the costs of services. There's a little murky line because we can support operational costs, and sometimes operational costs require paying for staff, but the staff has to be specifically related to the operational need of a housing facility or an affordable housing project. So just keep that in mind. We're not paying for services or salaries in general out of this money. Here are some big ways that we've spent money. We've, thanks to our partnerships in the community, we have used quite a bit of our funds in recent years to provide local rental assistance, which is nice because we can be a lot more flexible than HUD can be. We sort of target a limit of 60%, but generally anybody less than 80% of area median income is eligible. We require that the funds are expended within city limits. We've spent a lot of our local funds on improvement and preservation, rehab of emergency shelter facilities, as well as operational costs. That's mostly Consuelo's place. Funds have been used, and these are straight out of the act. So these are eligible: acquisition, conversion, preservation, and new construction of multi-income supported units, and that also can include infrastructure. Down payment assistance has been mortgage, really, it's more of a soft second mortgage buy down. We've used lots of affordable housing local funds to help people buy homes. We've also used funds to help people maintain their homes. Generally, the income cap for our local funds is 120% of area median income. MFA, as many of you know, has just raised their income cap to 150%, I think. So we are likely to follow suit because it just makes sense. We know there are lots of people who earn more than 120% and are still nowhere near able to afford our market rate housing here. So that is an upcoming attraction, and I may be reaching out to all of you to help us with the advocacy piece of getting that approved. Eligible applicants, it's all spelled out in the RFA. And we do allow, and I think most people don't know this, for-profit organizations can apply. They just have to have a mission or a business model that focuses on providing affordable housing. And again, we do want to know that the nonprofits applying have a mission to provide affordable housing and related services. Sometimes it's a little bit the other way. It's the services that the nonprofit was formed to provide, and then they realize that housing is a piece of that. So that's okay too. Again, we use this weighted value, these weighted criteria. And it's set up a little bit differently in this. I'm so sorry. I think I meant to edit the funding feasibility, so that's not quite the right term. But again, in this case, this is truly funding feasibility. We're just making sure that you have met the leverage requirements. We're about to talk about that in a minute. That you have sufficient operating budget to carry out the activities of the project. And again, we really want to know that you're using data to determine that there's a need, as well as, I think, anecdotal information is helpful, but we want to know that you're aware of the data and that that's driving kind of how we can evaluate and determine whether funds have been used effectively. And then we want to make sure that you have, again, this is like the generic criteria that goes in every city procurement. We want to know that your organization can do what you're setting out to do, that you've done it before and you've been successful. Okay, leverage versus match. We require for every dollar that you ask for your project that you have $3 from either a matching or leverage sources. So a match is the amount that your organization is contributing directly to the project. So this can be just cash, it can be funding, or in-kind goods and services. So it can be staff time, it can be a partnership with another organization that has value. So somebody else is providing a certain kind of service to your client base. You can count that. And then in turn, it's going to support the housing activity. Leverage is coming from an outside source. So this could be another grant, this could be a debt even, this could be private funds, philanthropic funds, in-kind services provided to the project. So that's different than provided to the organization. But it's all coming from the outside. And we even count for somebody buying a home, the leverage going into that transaction is the amount that that person is able to borrow on their own for their first mortgage. Like that's leverage as well. So here's an example of how leverage works. This is also in the RFA. In this example, this is a home ownership project. These numbers are way low. We're providing way more per household these days because our housing market's so expensive. We have to update this, but just the math is easy, right? If the applicant is requesting $100,000, they're proposing to serve 10 households at $10,000 each. They are also providing some second mortgages that are amortizing from their own organizational resources in the amount of $40,000 per household. Each buyer is paying for their closing costs, and then they're borrowing on their own, in their own capacity. They're borrowing money for a first mortgage. So that's how that's considered leverage and calculated. So then we're adding up everything except for the Affordable Housing Trust Funds. We're getting 2.3 million. So that's showing that the ratio, the amount applied for is 100. The organization's bringing 400 of its own resources, and then the total leveraged is that 1.8 million. So that gets us way up there to a $1 to $22 ratio. That's probably a little bit high. We would probably, if we're being a little more realistic on how much down payment assistance people need, that'll go down slightly, but home purchase definitely has a big leverage impact. Rental assistance is a little bit more complicated, but it operates on the same principle. In this case, if the organization was applying for $66,000, the grantee match again can include cash or in-kind value. We're looking at the rent that the organization is paying for the facility that they need to provide the counseling and the income verification services and the housing navigation. We're looking at staff time so that we're counting all of that as a grantee match. And then we're looking at the other private resources that are brought in from other outside resources. So that's 100,000. And then in this example, this applicant also got funding from other parts of the city, or it could be state funding or other federal funding. So that counts as a leverage dollars. And then the renters in general, many of them are 0% income, so they're not paying any rent, but some of them can. And so we're looking at that also as leverage. So they're bringing in their own outside dollars to help pay for their rent. So that's where we get to this total project cost of 211,600, and that gets us to about a 1 to 3.2 match and leverage ratio. So kind of complicated, but I feel like the forms in the application, I think as you look at them and fill them out, it's a little bit more obvious, but please, you have couple weeks left. Ask us questions. We're happy to kind of walk you through it. We want to make sure everybody's understanding what they're committing to. Okay, believe it or not, we are finally at the end. I'm going to just go to this slide. If you want to screenshot that to make sure you have everyone's info, I can also go back. I can also I'll paste it into it's not letting me. I'll paste it into the chat as well. All right, Tony, looks like you have some questions.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, there was a question from you. This person asked, how do you evaluate rental voucher assistance, assuming that you provide PEVs?
Assuming what's provided?
Assuming that you provide the acronym P, like Paul, B, Ball, V, Victor. I'm not sure what that acronym is. Q.
Okay. Hugh, do you want to speak and let us know, clarify what you're asking?
Yeah, I misunderstood the bullet point. I thought that you were offering project-based vouchers as well, and I thought that was also part of the application. So I misunderstood the way it was listed.
It can be used for a project.
So we could apply for a combination of capital funds for rental project and project-based vouchers.
Yeah, so you could say, hey, we're gonna directly subsidize 3 units in this project. So it's attached to that unit. So we just would be looking at making sure everybody living in that unit was income qualified. And then you would be committing that every time the unit turned over, the next person moving into that unit would be income qualified. Is that clear? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great.
That's a great question. Thanks again, Hugh. Alex, there's another question from Chainbreaker Collective, and the question is there a match requirement for CDBG funds or just AHTF?
That's a great question. So it's more of a match preference or a match, please do it for CDBG. There's no requirement on the federal level, but we really want to know that your organization can come up with $1 from somewhere else, either your own organizational resource or another funder to match. So it's $1 to $1. Affordable Housing Trust Fund is $1 to $3. For CDBG, we make it a little bit easier, but we do want to know that there's other money. It's really hard when projects are only funded through one source of funding. That doesn't really bode well for them to be sustainable over time. So we want to see that the organization that's applying for the funds has the capacity to bring other money to the project. And I see a raised hand from Chainbreaker Collective.
Hi, yeah, thank you. This is Tomas from.
Tomas.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, cool. I have a fancy headset in. Thank you for answering that question. I have sort of adjacent question about the CDBG funds for a rehab project. If a project were to start before the funding cycle came, would it be possible to use some of those funds retroactively to cover those expenses?
Unfortunately not. You have to have a contract with the city, and we have to be within the program year, which doesn't start until July 1.
Okay. And what if the rehab project straddles that time period? Could we do like just the period that starts after July 1 if those fundings came?
Definitely.
Okay.
And then that is also demonstration of your match, right? So you've spent, just coming up with random numbers, you spent $25,000, 5,000 from your organization, 20,000 from a grant, and then at the start of the program year, you use CDBG to pay for another 25,000. That's great.
Got it. Cool, thank you.
You bet. Anything else? I know it's so much information and it's so boring to listen to me talk that long. Does everyone know how to get in touch with us if you have any follow-up questions? Everyone feel comfy that you know where to find info and who to talk to? Thumbs up? Yay? Okay. No other questions? No? Going? All right, well, thank you everyone for being here. Reach out at any point. Again, I'll say it again, we will have a recording of this available. And if anyone missed the recording that you know of, let them know. They can watch it on their own time, and it still counts as attending the training. But please, submit questions in a written format, just so we have a record of everything and we can answer them in a written format. But we will make sure that everybody, Tony, you've copied everybody's name and contact info out of the chat.
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. So we'll make sure everybody gets all the links after this meeting, after everything's posted. And we're super excited. We love our partnerships in the city. This is what makes our day when we get to site monitoring. Is actually really fun for us because we get to go out into the community and see how the funds are being used and talk to the folks who are helping people, and it's great. We push all the paper and we're super happy when we get to know that it works. Oh, Hugh, it looks like your hand's raised again.
Yeah, one question. Let's say, for using round numbers, let's say there's $10 available. We ask for 3, and 7 are subscribed, or 8 are subscribed, leaving only 2. Does the department have the discretion to reduce the ask? Or is it kind of a firm thing where if you don't, there isn't enough funding, that the project is deemed infeasible and you get bumped?
Yeah, though I'm so glad you brought that up. I should have mentioned that. That's a great question. That I would say, as you structure your both in your narrative and also in your budget, if there are ways to structure it in terms of phases, or in terms of, hey, if we get the full amount, we can serve 200 people. If we get 2/3 of the amount, we can, whatever. Like if you can designate that to some degree, that's super, super helpful. The Community Development Commission is always happy to provide whatever funding is available to a great project, even if it's not the full amount that was asked for. Sometimes they'll even ask that in during the applicant presentation. They'll say, if you couldn't get all the funding, what could you do with half the funding? Or so, sometimes they'll even ask that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
All right, last chance. Anything else? All right, thanks everyone. Keep in touch. We look forward to reading your applications.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, Fritz. Bye, Kurt. All right, I think we're good actually, you guys. I don't know if we